Hello, everybody. Welcome to week 6 of W130 Principles of Composition. Today, we're going to talk about the summary response final draft prompt, how to craft a good introduction, and we'll also go over the details about how to put together your MLA style works cited page. Okay, first starting with introductions. Your first sentence is really important. It needs to be concise yet interesting. I'll give you some helpful tips about what you might choose as a first sentence, but first and foremost, just keep in mind that it's very important. A reader will decide how interesting the rest of your paper is going to be based off of that first sentence, and they may even decide whether or not they're going to keep reading. Therefore, if the first sentence is extremely long and difficult to understand, you could turn a reader off. And also, if it's not very interesting or it's just kind of boring, you could make them think that that is what the rest of the paper will be like. Your introduction should include some background about your topic, but don't try to fit everything in. You've got an entire paper in order to express different background ideas, so you don't have to cram that introduction full. Your introduction will, of course, present your thesis statement, and you want to refer to this week's video number 2, actually, not number 1, for more information about thesis statements. It will go into detail, and I promise you, you will be surprised, and after watching the video, you will find creating your thesis statements much easier than you thought it was. So here are some helpful tips for your first sentence. You can ask a rhetorical question, which basically means that you're not asking a question that you literally expect an answer to. It's a question meant to elicit a certain response. So a good example of a question like that could be, how would you like it if you won the lottery? Because 99.9% of people are going to say, I would really like that. So again, it's not a question that people would answer with a broad range of answers. It's an answer that you can pretty much determine what the response is going to be ahead of time, and you're asking it in order to elicit a certain emotional response of excitement or fear or anything else in between those two ranges of emotion. You can also share a statistic, or you can lead into one, as you'll see in a second in the example introduction. Or you could paint a picture by starting your introduction with a phrase like, imagine if XYZ were to happen, or imagine if the world was ABC. So again, asking a question, sharing a statistic, or painting a picture in the reader's mind to get them in the right frame of mind to read the rest of your introduction. Here's an example of an introduction that works really well. And this is written by a student from a few semesters ago. America faces a troubling and concerning statistic. We are known as one of the greatest countries in the world, yet our recidivism rates exceeds 80%. Recidivism, which is the tendency of a criminal to reoffend, may not be a hot topic in today's society. Many people may not even be familiar with the word. Nonetheless, it is crucial to understand and address the inefficiency of our current recidivism reducing programs. Adaptations and adjustments must be made to improve recidivism rates and offer successful rehabilitation to inmates expecting to return to society. So you can see that the introduction starts with a nice, concise sentence that is definitely an attention grabber, because if I'm the reader and I read that there's a troubling and concerning statistic, I'm really interested to find out what it is. So I'm being led in to the statistic. And then the second sentence goes ahead and shares that particular number with me. Okay, moving on to a discussion about the works cited page and MLA style. These are the basics. Your works cited page should start on its own page. It should not come following the end of your last paragraph. The title should be centered, and the title is simple. It's either works cited in the plural if you have more than one entry, or if you've only cited one source, you would type works cited. Again, it's centered at the top of the page. All of your entries should then be left aligned, and they should be alphabetized by the author's last name or the first word of the article, and I'll show you what I mean by that when we take a look at an example. And do not number your entries. That's a common mistake that I see, but it does not need to happen. Everything is organized through alphabetation. So here's the information that you need to gather about any given source in order to complete an entry on your Works Cited page. Your author name, the first and last. If there's two authors, you need both the first and last name for both authors. If there's three or more authors, you only need to gather the information for the first author that's listed on the publication, because we'll be using the word et al., which is Latin for and all, instead of typing out all of the authors' names. You need the title of the article, and if there is no author name, which is sometimes the case, you can use the title of the article to begin the entry. The date of publication. If it's not very obvious, listed right underneath the title or somewhere at the top, you can scroll all the way to the bottom of a web page, and often you can at least find a year of publication down at the footer. If you can't find a date at all, it's not a good source. The place of publication, which is either the website name or entity, something like the WashingtonPost.com, the NewYorkTimes.com, CNN.com, Forbes.com, the CBC. All these examples are entities of publication. And then you'll need the URL, so you'll want to copy paste that into whatever type of system you're using to keep track of your sources, and then the date that you accessed the material. So let's take a look at an example Works Cited page in MLA style. And I have included some comments here that I want to cover so that you know all of the different things that can happen on a Works Cited page. So for our first entry, you can see that the article title is placed in quotes. This is the correct formatting. Again, article titles are placed in quotes. They are not italicized. Larger bodies of work, like an entire book, would be placed in italics and not quotes. But when we're talking about a smaller piece of work, like an article on a web page, it is placed in quotes. The publishing site or the entity here, whitehouse.gov, is italicized. That's, again, the publishing site or entity. And then the date of publication is presented in day, month, year order. Moving forward, we can see that there's a period placed here at the end of the URL, and that's just prior to the date that the information was accessed on. And I want to point out too that the month of publication or access is abbreviated to the 3-letter abbreviation followed by a period, with 3 exceptions, and those are May, June, and July, which are written in full. As I noted earlier, if there are 3 or more authors, we'll use the Latin phrase et al. To indicate that. So you will list the last name, first name of the first author, comma, and then et al. To stand for all of the other authors. In the event that there is no author, you can use the first 1 to 4 words of the article title in place of the author's name. Here, just the first word was used, epic. In this entry, we see an example of when there are 2 authors. When there are 2 authors, the first author is listed last name, comma, first name, but then the second author is listed as first name, last name. In the event that you're using academic journals, you will likely run into volumes, issues, and articles. Make sure that you include that information within your entry. One final point here on the Works Cited page is that you'll notice the formatting is a little bit different than a paragraph. It's actually inverted. So we call this a hanging indent. And that means that the first part of the line of the entry is over here on the left, and then lines 2 and forward are indented by 1/2 inch. And in order to set this up, you can simply use the triangles here up at the top to move those lines over, and I'll show you an example here. You can see the last entry as well as this entry are not properly formatted. So let's start with this one. I'll place my cursor here at the beginning of the second line that I want to move over, and I will grab the bottom arrow and move it over. Similarly, I will place my cursor here just before HuffPost. Grab the bottom triangle and move it over. And now everything is properly aligned. When in doubt about how to format an entry, consult the web. It's very easy to Google answers to your MLA citation or works cited page questions. If you can't find the answer, you can always feel free to reach out and ask me, and the same should be true of any instructor that you have going forward. If you're struggling, you can always reach out and ask. If you're not comfortable doing that, you can always take a stop into the Writing Tutoring Center, and they should be able to help you as well. All right, before we sign off completely, as I mentioned, I do want to go ahead and take a look at the summary response final draft instructions. So I've pulled up the summary response essay final draft prompt that you have access to in our week 6 module. And I want to go through this with you to make sure that everything is really clear and there aren't any misunderstandings when you go to turn in this essay. So this week, you'll be working on revising your summary response essay. As you learned from the readings, revising is not simply fixing mistakes because that's editing or polishing. Revising instead is rethinking your key ideas, emphasis on rethinking. Also, you're rethinking your overall organization and the main point that you hope that readers take away from reading your work. Revision almost always means adding more sources, so you're truly going beyond what you initially started with and developing it. Developing new sentences, paragraphs, and removing some existing content sources if that's necessary. So the idea here in bold is that you are going to take your paper to the next level, not just fix it. Again, that's editing and polishing. Revising is improving. The requirements for your final draft are that it should be 1,500 words. That's a suggested length, but I think it fits the bill here. Make sure that you're using MLA formatting with the 12-point font, 1-inch margins, and all the other formatting techniques that you're familiar with. This time around, you'll include 3 sources. So you've already got 2 sources from your first draft. You're just going to be adding 1. So you don't have to have 3 new sources. You're taking your initial draft that you submitted to me and that I've given you feedback on with 2 sources, and now you are adding to that essay, improving it, and one of the ways you're improving it is by adding another source, building up your credibility and packing it with a little bit more information. Make sure that you're including in-text citations and that you have a works cited page for this draft, and it should be MLA style. And you should also be including a working thesis statement. I'm not looking for perfection here. We are still a long ways off from our final argumentative paper, but I want you to start thinking about that thesis statement, especially the formula that I shared in the other video. You should be starting to have an idea of how you feel about the topic and what major key point you might want to make about it. So again, working thesis statement, not a finalized one, so don't put too much pressure on yourself, but give it a go. The specific directions for revision are listed out here. In this revised final draft, you're going to add on by including an introduction that conveys the topic and idea that you're exploring. Obviously, it will include a thesis statement that indicates to your readers why your discussion is important. The introduction should be about 50 words. The conclusion should also be about 50 words, and it should pull the ideas together and point toward the next step in researching your topic. Make sure you're watching that other video about conclusions. That's going to help you out a lot. It's going to be painfully obvious if you don't watch it because you won't be using any of the tips that I'm giving in that video. And of course, you're adding a third source. So this section right here outlines what you're adding to the final draft in order to make it a significant improvement off of the first draft. I want to just emphasize this here too. I fully expect that you'll make changes to the original summaries and responses that you submitted because there's always room for improvement. So if any final drafts that include just copy-pasted summary responses from the first draft without any change being made will not be able to score higher than a B. So I am looking for changes to the material that you've already sent in, and of course some of those changes will be made based on what I've pointed out to you and the feedback that I've given. Some of those changes should also be initiated by you because you've had some time and space away from your work and now you can see a little more clearly how to improve it. And then, of course, you're going to be adding on a new source and an intro and a conclusion. So all of those things together will make this quite a different paper than the initial draft that you submitted the other week. And that concludes our video 1, week 6 meeting. If you have any questions, please feel free to shoot me an email. Thanks.